The silence in the house was suffocating, but the sound that finally broke it wasn't my daughter's voice. It was a cold, metallic clink from upstairs that proved I wasn't alone with the one I thought I was apologizing to. Now, armed with a blood-stained pry bar and staring at the woman who just took out my daughter, I realized the terrifying truth. I just let the wrong person into the house. The house was too quiet. That was the first thing that hit me. A heavy, suffocating blanket of silence that pressed down on the front porch. The morning air, usually buzzing with the distant drone of traffic or the chirping symphony of sparrows staking their claims, was dead still. It was the kind of silence that only comes when a very loud, very necessary noise has suddenly stopped. I stood there, my hand hovering an inch from the varnished oak of the front door, the keys I held feeling impossibly heavy in my palm. They were her keys, the spare set I'd kept on my own ring for years, the ones she'd insisted I keep just in case. Funny how just in case turns into right now. I looked down at the small silver fob hanging beside the brass one for the garage. It was shaped like a tiny, stylized wolf, a gift from her last birthday. She'd been so excited about that stupid little keychain. Now it just felt like a lead weight reminding me of how fast things had gone sideways. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive silence. I hadn't slept properly in 3 days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look on her face from last night, that mixture of hurt, betrayal, and a sudden cold finality that cracked something vital inside me. "Lily?" I tried, my voice coming out gravelly, not at all the steady, reassuring tone I aimed for. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time, projecting toward the sealed door. "Lily, honey, it's Dad. Can we just talk for a minute?" Nothing. Not a creak, not a shifting shadow behind the frosted glass panel. She was definitely home. Her little beat-up Honda was parked snugly in the driveway, the only splash of color on the overly manicured lawn. She hadn't gone anywhere. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and the faint, lingering scent of the lavender laundry detergent she favored. It smelled like her, like home, but it felt like a fortress I was being actively excluded from. "Look, I know you're upset," I continued, keeping my voice low, trying not to wake the neighbors. Not that I cared much about the neighbors anymore. All that mattered was breaking through this wall she'd erected. "What happened last night?" It was stupid. I reacted badly, I was stressed, and I shouldn't have said those things about your college applications. They were unfair. I take it back. All of it. A sound finally broke the silence. It wasn't a soft response or a tentative movement. It was sharp, immediate, and laced with genuine venom. "Go away!" The words hit me like physical blows. They weren't yelled with teenage melodrama. They were delivered with the clarity and conviction of someone who meant every syllable, someone who was actively closing the door on the person they loved most. The raw pain in her voice surprised me, even though I knew she was hurting. It was the sound of a boundary being drawn in concrete. I flinched back from the door as if I'd been struck. "Lily, please, don't say that. You know I love you." "If you loved me," her voice cracked, muffled slightly by the thick insulation, "you wouldn't be standing there demanding an audience for your apologies. You'd just leave me alone." My stomach twisted. She had me there. My desperate need to fix this, to control the narrative and smooth over the rift, was exactly what was driving her further away. I had forced this situation. I had pushed her to this breaking point with my own anxieties about her future. I stood frozen, the keys dangling uselessly. I knew, logically, that I should walk away. Give her the space she was begging for. Let the air clear. But the thought of leaving her there, stewing in whatever anger or sadness she was currently feeling, was unbearable. I pictured her small frame curled up on her bed, refusing to answer texts, staring at the ceiling while I paced the floor in my own house, separated from my child by a single barrier of wood and steel. This wasn't just about an argument over college essays. This was the culmination of months of tension, the slow erosion of trust that happens when parents get scared and teenagers start pulling away. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to gather my resolve. I had to prove I heard her, that I understood the depth of her anger, but I couldn't just disappear. Not today. Not when I knew what I was carrying in my pocket, the real reason I had shown up here first thing this morning before she'd even had coffee. "I'm not leaving, Lily," I said, my voice now steady, stripped bare of any pleading. It was a statement of fact, a quiet declaration of intent. "I'm not going anywhere until we talk. I'm sitting on the front steps, and I'm not moving until you open that door or call the police." I took one step back, dropped my briefcase, which felt ridiculously formal for this domestic siege, and slowly lowered myself onto the cold stone steps. The keys slipped slightly in my grip. Just as I settled, feeling the chill of the concrete seep through my jeans, a different sound echoed from inside. It wasn't her voice. It was a dull, heavy thud from upstairs, followed by a scraping noise like something heavy being dragged across the wooden floor of her bedroom. My stomach clenched again, not with anxiety over the argument, but with a sudden, sharp spike of real fear. That wasn't normal teenage angst. That sounded like furniture moving. "Lily, what was that noise?" "Are you all right in there?" I called, my voice losing its careful composure and spiking with alarm. I immediately started to rise, my adrenaline surging. The response was immediate and far more chilling than her demand to be left alone. "Don't come in here, Dad. I mean it. Just stay outside." Her voice was strained, almost a gasp, and there was a distinct metallic clink heard faintly through the door. My mind raced. What was she doing? Moving furniture? Why was she so panicked? I looked down at the keys in my hand again. They weren't just the keys to her room, they were the keys to the whole house. The master set she sometimes borrowed. I couldn't wait any longer. The sound of that metallic clink, it sounded exactly like a lock engaging, was too much. Throwing caution and the fragile hope of a peaceful reconciliation to the wind, I jammed the correct key into the deadbolt, twisted it hard, and shoved the door inward just as I heard her frantic whisper from upstairs. The house stood open, gaping into the morning light. I took one step over the threshold, my eyes scanning the hallway, ready for a confrontation, ready for anything, when I saw it. A single small, familiar object lying directly in the center of the entryway rug. It was the silver wolf keychain. It had been deliberately broken off the ring, and next to it, lying face up, was the spare house key I had just used to open the door. The key she had just assured me she was still holding, the key that was now clearly no longer in her possession. I stared, a horrifying thought blossoming in my chest, cold and sharp as winter ice. If she had broken the keychain, if she had discarded my key, and if she was upstairs desperately trying to secure herself inside her room, then who had answered me from the hallway, who had been yelling at me to stay away? And if it wasn't Lily, where in God's name was she? The air inside the hallway was thick, stale, and strangely cold, despite the warm morning sun pouring in through the open doorway. The silence that followed the sound of the door opening was absolute, a vacuum where Lily's panicked voice had just been. I stood rooted to the spot, my gaze flicking between the discarded wolf keychain, its metal glinting mockingly in the light, and the spare key lying beside it. That metallic clink I'd heard upstairs, it hadn't sounded like someone dropping a hairbrush or a jewelry box. It sounded like metal on metal, something heavy being secured. "Lily?" I barked, dropping the briefcase entirely. The sound echoed unnervingly in the emptiness of the foyer. My eyes darted to the staircase, its mahogany railing gleaming dully. "This isn't funny. What did you do?" My fear, which had been a dull ache when I was standing on the porch, now spiked into a white-hot adrenaline rush. The argument was forgotten. This was about immediate danger. I took a step toward the stairs, my hand gripping the newel post. "I'm coming up, Lily. You need to tell me what's going on." From the top of the stairs, a voice responded. It was softer than the one from moments before, almost breathy, but it was undeniably Lily's. Yet it sounded wrong. Too flat, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. "Don't bother, Dad. I'm busy." "Busy doing what?" I demanded, taking the first step up. The wood creaked beneath my weight, a familiar sound yet suddenly alien in this tense stillness. "You sound strange. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," the voice replied from the landing, where her bedroom door remained stubbornly shut. "Just cleaning up." Cleaning up. That's what had caused the thud and the dragging sound. I moved faster, taking the steps 2 at a time, my breath catching in my throat. As I reached the top step, I could see her bedroom door clearly. It was closed, yes, but it wasn't just closed. There was a heavy piece of furniture, a dark antique wardrobe that hadn't been moved in a decade, now wedged tightly against it, blocking any possibility of it swinging open from the inside. It was barricaded. "Lily, move away from the door right now. I'm going to move this wardrobe." I reached out, placing my hands on the cold carved wood of the heavy piece. It took immense effort to even budge it an inch. "No!" The voice shrieked this time, high and frantic, laced with a genuine terror that banished all doubts that this was a prank. "Don't touch it. Please, Dad, just leave me alone. I need time." "Time for what? To hurt yourself?" I grunted, putting my shoulder into the wardrobe, straining every muscle to move the dead weight. "I am not leaving you in there locked away." As I braced myself for another Herculean push, another sound drifted from beneath the door. It wasn't shouting or weeping. It was a steady, rhythmic drip, drip, drip onto the carpet underneath. My blood ran cold. I froze mid-push, staring at the small gap between the bottom of the wardrobe and the floor. The carpet just beneath the doorframe was dark, rapidly spreading. "Lily, what is that?" My voice was barely a whisper now, the sheer terror of the situation eclipsing my physical strength. "What's dripping?" For a long, agonizing moment, there was only the sound of that slow, steady drip. Then, the voice from behind the barricade returned, quieter than before, imbued with a terrible calm that was worse than any scream. "It's the paint, Dad. I told you I needed to finish the project." Paint. It had to be paint. A massive, messy DIY job. That was the only logical explanation for the barricade, the noise and the liquid seeping under the door. But the metallic clink I heard earlier? That didn't fit with paint cans. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my shaking hands so I could focus on moving the wardrobe again. "Okay, honey, paint. I get it. But you have to let me in. We can clean it up together. Just tell me you're okay." I leaned close to the door, trying to hear past the thick oak. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to catch any sign of her breathing, her movement, anything to confirm she was physically behind that barrier. And then I heard it. Not from behind the barricaded door, but from the hallway itself. A slow, measured footstep coming from the far end of the hall near the linen closet. A footstep that was decidedly not Lily's light tread. It was heavier, slower, imbued with a grim deliberation. I whipped my head around, scrambling backward off the landing. My heart stopped dead in my chest. Standing at the end of the hallway, framed against the shadowed doorway leading to the spare bathroom, was a figure, tall, too broad for Lily, wearing clothes I didn't recognize. Dark, slightly muddy work boots and heavy denim. The figure was turned partially away from me, seemingly focused on something they were holding, their back rigid. As I watched, horrified, the figure slowly turned their head over their shoulder. In the dim light filtering from the open staircase, I saw their face, or rather the startling lack of it. They were wearing a mask, not a surgical mask, but a thick, crudely fashioned burlap sack, the eye holes stitched shut except for two jagged tears that allowed the wearer to peer out, and the hand that emerged from the shadow of the linen closet, holding something long and gleaming that caught the faint light, was certainly not my daughter's slender hand. It was gloved in thick black leather, and the object it gripped was unmistakably a short, wicked-looking pry bar. This person wasn't trapped in her room. This person was outside her room, waiting for me, and they were now slowly, deliberately moving toward the barricaded door, toward the sound of the dripping fluid, stepping out of the shadows of my own house. The burlap mask tilted slightly as the figure in the hallway registered my presence at the top of the stairs. The air grew instantly colder, sucking all warmth and reason from the hallway. The rhythmic drip, drip, drip from behind the barricaded door seemed to amplify, mocking the unnatural silence from the intruder before me. I didn't scream. The sound lodged somewhere deep in my throat, a paralyzed knot of terror. My mind, still scrambling to reconcile the sight of the intruder with the voice of my daughter pleading from behind the wardrobe, couldn't process the threat. It was too alien, too ripped from some nightmare I never thought could cross into our suburban reality. The figure advanced one slow, crunching step toward the barricaded door, the pry bar held loosely but deliberately at their side. They didn't acknowledge me directly, their attention seemingly fixed on the task of breaching Lily's sanctuary. "Get away from her door," I managed, the words scraping out like broken glass. My paralysis broke, replaced by a fierce, primal need to protect my child. Instinct took over, ditching logic entirely. I didn't have a weapon. All I had were the keys I'd dropped by the front door, far below, and the crushing weight of the antique wardrobe pressing against me as a physical reminder of my failure to reach Lily. I backed away from the landing, retreating to the relative safety of the upper hallway corner, putting distance between myself and the attacker. If I could just get back downstairs, get to my phone, call 911. "Stop right there," the figure commanded, their voice muffled and distorted by the sack, but deep, resonant, and unequivocally male. It was nothing like Lily's terrified, high-pitched plea. "You're not helping." They stopped near the wardrobe, pausing their slow advance toward the heavy obstruction. They glanced over their shoulder at me, and even through the rough holes stitched for eyes, I felt the weight of their chilling focus. "You already made your choice downstairs," the masked man stated, his tone conversational, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying than outright rage. "You prioritized your guilt over her needs. Now stand down." Prioritized my guilt? What did he mean? He meant the argument. He meant me standing on the porch instead of bursting in immediately. But how could this masked lunatic know the intimate details of my argument with my daughter from an hour ago? Before I could formulate a response, the man returned his attention to the wardrobe. He didn't struggle with it like I had. Instead, he casually brought the tip of the pry bar up, sliding the thin, hooked end into the narrow gap between the top of the wardrobe and the door frame. With a sharp upward twist that required almost no visible effort, he levered the massive piece of furniture. The wardrobe groaned, a sound of ancient wood protesting structural violence. It lifted maybe 3 inches off the floor, just enough for the pressure against the door to ease. Behind the door, Lily screamed, a genuine, raw, unadulterated sound of absolute horror. "No, I told you!" she shrieked. The masked man didn't even flinch. He dropped the wardrobe with a deafening crash back onto the floorboards, sending vibrations through the entire house, instantly shoving the door shut with renewed force. The drip, drip, drip stopped instantly, silenced by the impact. The man didn't look at me again. He stepped back from the wardrobe, wiping his gloved hand slowly on his thigh, as if checking for dust. "See?" he said to me, his voice calm again. "She doesn't want you interfering." Then he turned and walked not toward the stairs, but toward the linen closet, disappearing back into the deep shadows of the upper hall where the coats hung. I heard the soft sound of a latch clicking, the slight give of a door being closed and perhaps locked. I bolted down the stairs, ignoring the stiffness in my legs, propelled by the primal need to get my phone and call for help. I scrambled to the front door, snatched up my briefcase, and fumbled for my phone in my pocket. 911, what is your emergency? A calm, professional voice answered instantly. My daughter. She's being held captive in her room. There's a man in my house, masked. He just barricaded her in. I gasped out, my voice ragged, trying to provide my address as clearly as possible through my ragged breathing. Sir, can you confirm your location? And is the individual armed? Yes, armed, I think, a crowbar, and she's upstairs. Please hurry. As I relayed the address, my eyes were glued to the staircase, expecting the masked figure to reappear and attack. The hallway remained empty. The silence returned, heavy with menace. Help is being dispatched, sir. Stay on the line and remain calm. Do not engage the subject. I won't, I promise. Just hurry. I backed against the wall by the door, my gaze fixed on the shadow where the intruder had disappeared. I waited for the sound of sirens, for the blessed arrival of law enforcement. 3 seconds passed. 4, 5. Then, from directly behind me, right next to the door I was leaning against, a new voice spoke. It was breathy, close, and it smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic, a different metallic scent than the pry bar. He wasn't lying about staying put, Dad. I spun around, slamming myself away from the wall, dropping the phone which clattered onto the hardwood floor. The dispatcher's voice immediately garbled into static fuzz. Standing less than 2 feet away from me, where I was certain nothing had been a moment before, was Lily. She was pale, her eyes wide and bloodshot, but she was physically intact. She was wearing her pajamas. She wasn't holding anything, and she was looking not at me but past me, toward the stairs where the masked man had just vanished. Lily, oh my God, you're here. Where were you? What was that man? She held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence, her expression not one of relief, but of profound exhaustion and resignation. I was never upstairs, Dad, she whispered, taking a slow, deliberate step toward me. Her voice was weak but clear, utterly devoid of the terror I had heard moments before. I was in the basement. That was the cleaning noise you heard. I was moving the old tarp so I could see everything clearly. My confusion morphed into a suffocating dread. The basement? But the voice, the barricade. Lily tilted her head, looking toward the dark open doorway to the basement stairs, which led down into the untouched darkness beneath the kitchen. "That voice upstairs," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, and for the first time I saw a flicker of true agonizing fear in them, a fear directed not at me but at the upstairs hallway. That wasn't the man who broke in. That was him. Him who? I stammered, looking frantically between my daughter and the shadowed ascent to the upper floor. Lily's eyes widened further, filling with unshed tears, as she finally looked down at her own hands. She lifted them slowly, revealing what she had been hiding behind her back the entire time. She wasn't empty-handed. Clutched tightly in her right hand, slick with a reddish-brown substance that was definitely not paint, was the missing pry bar, and dangling from her left wrist, secured tightly by a thin, almost invisible ligature, was a single, heavy, blood-stained work boot. "He trapped me down there while she was upstairs," Lily choked out, her voice breaking completely. "And I just unlocked the front door for you. Now we have to go. He's coming down the stairs." The world tilted on its axis. The pry bar in Lily's hand was unmistakable, its hooked end smeared with a thick, dark residue that now looked horribly familiar against the light coming from the front window. And the work boot, heavy, muddy, and unnervingly familiar, dangling from her wrist like a grotesque trophy. The realization slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The masked man upstairs wasn't the intruder. He was the victim. "Lily, what have you done?" I whispered, staring from the bloodied tool to the boot, completely unable to reconcile this terrified, desperate girl standing before me with the monster who had apparently just subdued someone upstairs. Her eyes pleaded with me, desperate for me to understand something I couldn't possibly grasp. "He wasn't the one I was afraid of, Dad. He was trying to stop her." "Her? Who is her?" I looked wildly back toward the staircase, where the heavy silence now felt less like a pause and more like a coiled predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. The dispatcher's voice was still babbling static from the fallen phone, a soundtrack to my rapidly dissolving sanity. "The one who took the mask, the one who called out to you from the landing," Lily hissed, yanking the boot tighter against her wrist. "The one who locked me in the basement. I heard her tell you to leave her alone. That was her voice, Dad. She sounds just like me." My mind fought desperately to build a bridge between the voice of my daughter, the supposed captive in the basement, and the voice that had taunted me from behind the barricade upstairs, the one belonging to the male intruder. It was a hall of mirrors, a twisted game of substitution. "Lily, we need to get out of here now," I said, abandoning the frantic questions. I lunged toward the front door, intending to grab my phone and run into the street, abandoning the house and whatever horrific tableau it contained. As my fingers closed around the plastic casing of the phone, the sound of footsteps started again from the top of the stairs. This time, they weren't the heavy, deliberate tread of the man in the work boots. These steps were lighter, quicker, almost a rhythmic tapping against the wood, the sound of bare feet on the landing. Lily reacted instantly, shoving me hard toward the front door. "Go, get out, don't let her see us together." She spun around, turning her back to the staircase, and with a surge of adrenaline I didn't know she possessed, she hurled the heavy work boot straight up the stairs. It struck the wall near the landing with a sickening thud, followed by a sharp, strangled cry of surprise, not pain, but pure shock. "She's coming!" Lily shrieked, grabbing my arm with surprising strength and yanking me back inside, pulling the heavy oak door shut with a resounding thud that echoed the one upstairs. I was trapped again, but this time I was inside with Lily, who was armed with a blood-stained pry bar and terrified of something that sounded exactly like her own voice. "Where are the keys to your room? We need to lock ourselves in somewhere," I demanded, my gaze darting around the foyer, searching for any other secure space. "No time," she spat, shoving the pry bar into my hands. "She wants the keys. That's why she was upstairs, to get them before I could." The silence from upstairs was shattered by a sudden, terrifying sound, the sound of wood splintering. Not a gentle creak, but a violent crack, as if the barricade had just been blown apart. "She's coming down the stairs, Dad, now!" Lily pulled me toward the rear of the house, toward the kitchen, her eyes wide with panic. We stumbled into the kitchen. It was clean, meticulously tidy, yet felt suffocatingly small. Lily shoved open the pantry door, a walk-in closet used for bulk supplies, and shoved me inside. "Get in! Hide!" I crammed myself between sacks of flour and canned goods, the smell of dried spices overwhelming. Lily stayed in the doorway, positioning herself just outside, forcing her body to act as the last line of defense. "Lily, get in here with me," I pleaded, reaching for her. "I can't. I need to keep her away from the hall. She wants the keys. If she gets them, she'll leave. And then you'll be stuck here alone." "What keys, Lily? Tell me." Her face was stark white, illuminated only by the harsh overhead light of the kitchen. "The ones for the old shed, Dad. The ones you keep hidden in the attic for the emergency repairs. She knows you have them. I heard her arguing with the other one about them before you got home." Before I could process the fact that there were two people involved, a masked man and this mysterious mimicking her, a shadow fell across the kitchen doorway. Standing there, framed by the light, was the figure from the landing. It was still wearing the burlap sack, but it was no longer holding the pry bar. Instead, it was holding something different, something duller, heavier. But it wasn't the same figure. This one was shorter, slighter, undeniably feminine in build beneath the bulky burlap. And as she stepped fully into the kitchen, the bag dipped slightly, revealing a cascade of long, dark hair that looked exactly like Lily's. She hadn't taken the pry bar, she had dropped it. And in her hand now she held the heavy iron skillet that usually sat on the stove rack. She didn't look at Lily, who stood frozen just outside the pantry door. She looked directly at me, inside the pantry, past the barrier of Lily's body. "You took the keys," the distorted, familiar voice whispered from behind the sack. It was mocking Lily's tone perfectly, the same pleading inflection I had heard moments ago, now turned into a weapon. "You didn't listen when I told you to leave, so now you both stay." Then she swung. Not at me, but at Lily. The skillet connected with a sickening, wet impact against the side of Lily's head. Lily crumpled instantly, dropping the real pry bar with a clatter onto the linoleum floor. The figure paused only long enough to glance down at the unconscious body of my daughter before turning her full, silent attention back to the pantry, raising the skillet high over her head. And as she moved to strike the pantry door, I finally understood what the masked man had been doing. He hadn't been trying to break in. He had been trying to keep her out, but he had failed. And now, the only thing between me and the monstrous imitation of my daughter was a thin sheet of painted plywood. My fingers tightened around the handle of the pry bar Lily had given me, but before I could even raise it, the masked figure, the male intruder, finally appeared, barreling through the hallway entrance behind the woman with the skillet. He was breathing heavily, clearly having fought his way down the stairs. He stopped dead when he saw the scene, the unconscious Lily, the woman with the skillet, and me trapped in the pantry. He yanked the burlap mask from his head, revealing a face pale with sweat and streaked with blood. He looked directly at me, desperation etched into every line of his face. "Don't move," he yelled, his real voice raw. "She's not your daughter. That's the copy. Your real daughter locked herself in the shed an hour ago. She sent me here to get the master keys from the attic so you could let her out before it found her." And with that final, shattering declaration, the woman holding the skillet turned her attention away from the pantry door, away from me, and charged the man who had just ripped off his disguise. A brutal, desperate fight erupted in the narrow kitchen, the sound of metal against metal echoing deafeningly, and I was left trapped, armed with the wrong weapon, staring at the unconscious body of the daughter I thought I had saved, while two doppelgangers fought violently over the real one's fate. The world compressed into a horrifying tableau of iron and screams. The man, the real man, the one who wasn't wearing the mask, launched himself at the woman with the skillet, tackling her away from the pantry door just as she was about to bring the heavy iron down again. They slammed into the corner table, sending chairs skittering across the linoleum. "The attic!" the man grunted, struggling to wrench the skillet from the woman's grip. "Go! Get the keys, now!" I didn't hesitate. Logic had been burned out of me hours ago. Only survival and the faint, flickering hope that one of them was telling the truth remained. The woman fighting him was wearing Lily's pajamas, looked exactly like Lily, but her eyes, even in the fleeting glimpses I caught of them, held a cold, predatory intelligence that chilled me to the bone. The man was bruised, bleeding, and terrified, the terror of a messenger fighting against an unstoppable tide. I pushed out of the pantry, stumbling over the discarded identical work boot and stepping around the motionless form of my daughter. I spared a desperate glance at her still face before scrambling for the staircase. The real keys, the ones to the old locked shed where Lily said she was hiding, were in the attic, tucked away in a sealed box of emergency tools. I took the stairs 2 at a time, ignoring the sounds of the vicious struggle escalating below me. The kitchen became a cacophony of crashing metal and muffled shouts. The attic access was in the hallway ceiling, a square panel that required pulling a dangling rope. I grabbed the rope and yanked. The trapdoor groaned open, revealing the dark, dusty opening to the storage space above. I scrambled up, pulling myself into the stale, stifling heat of the attic. Motes of dust danced in the single beam of light, cutting from a small, grimy vent. I found the box instantly. It was tucked behind the unused water heater, just as I'd placed it years ago. A heavy metal lockbox, secured with a combination only my wife and I knew. I punched in the numbers, my hands shaking so violently I almost missed the sequence. Click. The latch sprang open. Inside, nestled on old linens, was a single, heavy brass key with a tarnished, distinctive head, the shed key, and next to it, a small laminated card with a handwritten note. If this is opened, the emergency protocol is active. Do not let the imitator leave the property. The word imitator hit me like a fresh wave of nausea. My wife and I had planned this ridiculous emergency protocol years ago, a joke about extreme natural disasters, never imagining it would apply to something living, something replicating. I snatched the key, shoved the card back into the box, and slammed the lid shut. I paused, listening intently. Downstairs, the sounds of the fight had abruptly stopped, replaced by a different, more terrifying noise, the sound of dragging, slow, wet, heavy. I peered down through the opening in the ceiling. The kitchen was empty of movement. The table was overturned. The floor was slick with dark puddles. Then a single silhouette appeared at the base of the stairs. The woman. She wasn't dragging the man. She was dragging Lily's motionless body. But she wasn't dragging her toward the front door. She was dragging her toward the basement hatch, the one Lily said she had been trapped behind. And she wasn't alone. The man in the work boots was standing by the basement door, holding the skillet, looking utterly defeated. He was no longer fighting. He was just watching. The woman glanced up toward the attic opening, as if sensing my gaze. Even through the deep shadow, I could see the burlap mask was slightly askew on her head, revealing a sliver of white skin near her jawline. "Looking for this, Daddy?" Her voice echoed up the stairwell, perfectly mimicking Lily's tone of resigned exhaustion from moments before. "The shed key? We already have the primary target." The man downstairs, the one who had pulled off the mask, raised his head and his voice, projecting with desperate clarity. "Don't go down there. She's already locked the hatch from the inside. It's a trap." The woman, the imitator, gave a dry, raspy chuckle that was utterly unlike my daughter's sweet giggle. She dropped the pry bar from her hand. "Too late," she whispered, and then she deliberately, slowly, kicked the small, laminated protocol card that I must have knocked down when I entered the attic, sliding it directly into the crack of the basement door hatch. She then stepped away from the basement door, allowing the man in the boots, the real intruder, the one who had apparently been subdued, to finally approach the heavy door. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with an awful certainty. "She wants you to use the shed key, Dad," he called up, his voice trembling. "But she already took the other set. The shed key only opens one thing permanently." The woman with the skillet stepped back and yanked the door open, revealing the black maw of the basement stairs leading down into total darkness. Then she pushed the unconscious Lily down the first few steps. "Come and get your daughter, Dad," she purred, her voice shifting, taking on an unnatural, almost metallic reverberation. "Or I'll just use this one to lock you in with a real prize." The man downstairs yelled one final warning, but it was too late. The woman lunged past him and slammed the basement door shut. A loud, decisive clunk echoed from below, the sound of a heavy bolt being thrown home from the inside. Then, the man in the work boots, the supposed ally, turned his head, his face grim. He looked up at me, standing helpless in the dusty attic hatch. "That wasn't Lily in the basement," he rasped, wiping blood from his lip. "That was the prototype. Lily knew they were coming for the keys. She went to the one place she knew she'd be safe from both of them." He pointed not toward the basement, but toward the front door of the house. "She went to the shed, Dad, and the only way to open that door from the outside is with the master keys she took this morning, the ones you have." My heart hammered, realizing the terrible truth. Lily had taken the keys this morning, the ones I'd been holding. She took my set. She hadn't yelled at me to leave. She had been trying to keep me from using the keys on the front door. I looked down at the heavy brass key clutched in my hand, the shed key, the key to the only safe place left. But the imitator was now downstairs, presumably unlocking the basement where the prototype, perhaps the man who had been fighting her, was trapped. And the woman who looked like Lily, the one who had just locked herself in the dark with my real daughter's body, was still standing just inside the kitchen, blocking the main hallway. And then the final damning piece of information clicked into place, spurred by the sight of the man in the boots standing defeated by the basement hatch. "Wait!" I whispered down to the man. "If Lily is in the shed and you were sent to get the master keys, then why were you wearing the boots and the mask?" The man didn't answer. He just slowly raised his hands, his eyes wide with a chilling, dawning horror as he finally looked down at his own feet. He was standing in bare feet. The heavy, muddy work boots were still lying discarded on the kitchen floor, right next to Lily's unconscious body. The man who had just unmasked himself was also an imitation. Before I could scream, before I could move, a small dry click echoed from the master bedroom, down the hall to my left, a room I hadn't even considered. The door slowly swung open. Standing there, silhouetted perfectly against the morning light filtering through the bedroom window, was my actual wife, Clara. She was holding my heavy service pistol, the one I thought was locked in the safe downstairs, and she was leveling it directly at the man standing in the kitchen. "You should have stayed on the porch, honey," Clara said, her voice clear, level, and utterly devoid of the fear or familiarity I remembered. Her eyes, however, weren't the warm brown I knew. They were obsidian black, like polished ink. "You shouldn't have taken my keys.